The programming you never questioned. What if I told you that every lesson about fairness, every speech about equality, every sermon about staying humble was specifically engineered to ensure you never become dangerous? They didn't just teach you how to think. They programmed you to think in circles, to chase your tail, to celebrate the very chains that bind you. And the cruelest part, you call it virtue. Let me be explicit. The system doesn't fear your anger. It fears your clarity. It doesn't fear your rebellion. It fears your sovereignty. It doesn't fear your voice. It fears the moment you stop asking for permission and start issuing commands. So they give you a manual, a code, a set of beliefs disguised as morality, and you followed it because you thought it would make you good. But it didn't make you good. It made you governable. Consider the peasant, not the medieval kind, but the mental kind. The man who wakes up responding to alarms set by others, who measures his worth by metrics invented by strangers, who spends his life waiting, hoping for things to get better, for someone to notice, for luck to finally turn his way. He doesn't realize he's been trained to wait, trained to defer, trained to believe that patience is a virtue when really it is just postponed action dressed up as wisdom. Now consider the king, not the hereditary kind, but the mental kind. The man who understands that reality bends to those who refuse to bend to reality, who sees rules as suggestions written by people no smarter than himself, who recognizes that every system, every structure, every hierarchy exists because someone decided it should, and that decision can be unmade. The king doesn't wait for permission because he understands something fundamental. Permission is just another word for control, and he refuses to be controlled. The difference between these two isn't talent. It isn't intelligence. It isn't even circumstances. The difference is entirely mental. It's how they process the world. The peasant sees what is and assumes it's permanent. The king sees what is and asks who benefits from keeping it that way. The peasant accepts limits. The king questions who set them. The peasant seeks fairness. The king seeks leverage. And that difference, that fundamental difference in thinking, determines everything that follows. You've been taught to think with consensus, to check your ideas against the crowd, to validate your instincts through group approval. And every time you do this, every time you pause to ask what will they think, you've already surrendered. You've made the crowd your master. You've given strangers veto power over your life. And the king watching this from his position of power, he's not judging you. He's using you, because the man who needs approval is the man who can be controlled through approval. And control is what power is built on. The architecture of mental sovereignty. Here's what they never told you about power. It isn't about resources. It isn't about connections. It isn't even about talent. Power is about information asymmetry. It's about knowing things others don't, seeing things others can't, understanding patterns while others see chaos. And most importantly, it's about keeping that knowledge to yourself while everyone else announces theirs. The peasant thinks out loud. He processes in public. He shares his plans, his doubts, his strategies, his goals. He does this because he's been taught that openness equals honesty and honesty equals good. But in the game of power, openness equals vulnerability. It's handing your opponents the blueprint to your destruction. It's painting a target on your back and then wondering why arrows keep finding you. The king, by contrast, has learned something crucial. Mystery is currency. The less people know about your thinking, the more powerful your thinking becomes. Not because you're hiding weakness, but because uncertainty creates deference. When people can't predict you, they can't prepare for you. When they can't map your mind, they can't manipulate your decisions. When they don't know your limits, they assume you have none. And that assumption, that gap between what they know and what they imagine, that's where your power lives. Think about the last time someone asked you about your plans, your dreams, your next move, and you told them everything. In detail, with enthusiasm. Now ask yourself, what did they do with that information? Did they help? Did they support? Or did they file it away, consciously or unconsciously? As intelligence? Intelligence about your vulnerabilities, your timeline, your dependencies, your pressure points. Because people gather information instinctively, and information about you is power over you. The king understands this instinctively, so when asked about his plans, he smiles. He deflects. He gives answers that sound complete, but reveal nothing. We'll see what happens. I'm exploring options. Time will tell. These aren't evasions. These are fortifications. They're the verbal equivalent of castle walls. They look pleasant enough from the outside, but they're designed to keep enemies from ever reaching the throne room where decisions are actually made. Let me tell you something about transparency that no one else will. It's a modern myth. A corporate buzzword. A social media delusion. The idea that you should broadcast your process, share your journey, document your evolution. That's not empowerment. That's surveillance, capitalism, dressed up as authenticity. You're not building a brand. You're building a case file. You're not sharing your story. You're giving away your strategy. And every piece of information you volunteer is ammunition that will eventually be used either to diminish your accomplishment or undermine your ascent. The king shares nothing until victory is irreversible. He doesn't announce the game until he's already won. He doesn't reveal his position until it's fortified. He doesn't explain his thinking until it no longer matters what others think, because he understands that premature disclosure is just another form of asking permission. And kings don't ask, they act. Then they let others adjust. The economics of attention and approval, there's a transaction happening constantly, invisibly, that most people never notice. It's the exchange of your sovereignty for their validation. Every time you post 4 likes, you're trading power for applause. Every time you share for engagement, you're exchanging agency for attention. Every time you explain yourself to people who haven't earned explanations, you're making deposits into their account of power over you. And the cruelest part, you think you're connecting? You think you're building community? You think you're being authentic? But what you're actually doing is becoming predictable, manageable, controllable. The peasant craves this validation like oxygen. He needs to be seen, needs to be understood, needs to be appreciated. And at need, the dependency makes him easy to manipulate. Want to control a peasant? Threaten his visibility. Criticize his choices publicly. Withdraw your approval. Watch how quickly he contorts himself to win it back. Watch how he changes his position, softens his stance, compromises his vision, all to maintain the steady drip of validation he's become addicted to. The king has severed this dependency, not because he doesn't care what others think, but because he cares more about what happens than how it's perceived. He's shifted the equation. Instead of asking, will they approve, he asks, will it work? Instead of seeking consensus, he seeks result. Instead of performing for an audience, he operates for an outcome. And this shift, this fundamental reorientation from approval to effectiveness, is what separates the ruled from the ruler. Let me be precise about what this means practically. It means you stop explaining. When someone questions your decision, you don't justify it. You let the question hang. You let them wonder. You let their uncertainty grow into respect or fear or both. But you do give them the satisfaction of your reasoning because your reasoning is none of their business. Your thought process is proprietary information, and you don't give away intellectual property for free. It means you stop announcing. When you're building something, you build in silence. You don't post progress updates. You don't share preliminary victories. You don't celebrate milestones publicly, because every announcement is an invitation for interference. Every update is a chance for someone to tell you why it won't work. Every preview is an opportunity for theft or sabotage. The king builds behind closed doors, and when the door opens, the building is already complete. Undeniable. Immovable. It means you stop seeking permission in subtle ways. What do you think about this idea? Does this make sense? Am I crazy to consider this? These aren't questions. These are submission rituals. You're asking the crowd to validate your instinct. You're outsourcing your decision-making to people who don't have your vision, your knowledge, or your stake in the outcome. And when they say, I do want to know, or seems risky, or have you considered, you let their uncertainty infect your clarity. You turn their fear into your hesitation, and momentum dies. The king doesn't poll the room before he acts. He surveys the terrain, calculates the risk, makes the decision, and moves. Then, and only then, does he consider what others think, not to second-guess himself, but to anticipate their response, to prepare for their resistance, to counter their objections before they can organize opposition. He uses their thinking as intelligence, not as guidance. There's a difference. One maintains your sovereignty, the other surrenders it. The discipline of emotional independence here as a truth that will disturb you. Most people are emotional hustlers. They don't control their internal state. External circumstances do. Someone criticizes them. Take Hoyaps. Someone praises them. They inflate. Someone ignores them. They spiral. Their mood, their confidence, their sense of self-worth. It's all outsourced to whoever happens to be in the room or on the screen. They're not individuals. They're weather vanes, and weather vanes don't build empires. They just show which way the wind is blowing. The peasant is at the mercy of his emotions because he's never been taught to observe them. He thinks he is his emotions. Someone insults him. He doesn't think I feel insulted. He thinks I am insulted. Someone doubts him. He doesn't think they express doubt. He thinks I must be doubtful. The emotion and the identity are fused. So when the emotion gets triggered, his entire sense of self gets hijacked. And in that hijacked state, he makes decisions. Bad ones. Reactive ones. Decisions that serve the emotion, not the mission. The king has created distance between himself and his emotional weather. Not because he doesn't feel, but because he doesn't let feelings make decisions. He observes them, studies them, treats them as data. Interesting. I'm feeling anger right now. What triggered it? What does it want me to do? And is that action aligned with my objectives? This pause, this gap between stimulus and response, is where power lives. It's the space where kings operate and peasants flounder. Let me give you a practical example. Someone disrespects you publicly, challenges your competence, questions your judgment. The peasant reacts immediately. He defends. He explains, escalates. He needs to correct the record right now, because his ego is in pain and pain demands immediate relief. So he gives a response that satisfies his emotion, but weakens his position. He shows he can be baited. He shows his buttons are accessible. He shows his composure is fragile, and everyone watching files that away his intelligence about his vulnerabilities. The king, facing the same situation, feels the same anger, but he doesn't move. He doesn't speak. He holds eye contact, just long enough to make the challenger uncomfortable. Then he shifts his attention elsewhere, dismissing the challenge through indifference rather than engagement. And in that non-response, he communicates something far more powerful than any comeback, that the challenger is insignificant enough to warrant a response, that his opinion is irrelevant, that his disrespect has no impact. And that silence, that withholding of the reaction the challenger wanted, is more devastating than any argument could be. This requires training, because your entire nervous system is wired for reactivity. For millennia, immediate responses kept humans alive. If something moved in the grass, you didn't pause to consider if it was wind or a predator. You ran. That's still in your wiring. But in the modern arena of power, that reactivity is your weakness. The person who can trigger your response controls your actions. The person who can make you emotional controls your decisions. The person who can provoke you owns you. And kings refuse to be owned. So you train. You practice the pause. Someone says something designed to hurt, and you feel the hurt, but you don't act on it. You notice Italiano, you sit with it. You let it exist without letting it dictate. Someone dangles bait, and you see the bait, but you don't bite. Someone tries to rush you into a decision, and you feel the pressure, but you slow down anyway. This is the discipline of emotional sovereignty, the capacity to feel without being enslaved by feelings, to experience without being controlled by experience. And over time, something shifts. The things that used to derail you start to bounce off. Insults lose their sting because you're no longer measuring your worth by external validation. Criticism loses its power because you're no longer seeking approval from people who do you want to understand your vision. Pressure loses its effectiveness because you're no longer operating on someone else's timeline. You become increasingly difficult to manipulate, increasingly difficult to predict, increasingly dangerous, because the man who can't be emotional hijacked is the man who can't be controlled. The strategy of calculated silence, there's a weapon so powerful that most never think to use it. It costs nothing, requires no resources, needs no permission, yet it can dismantle arguments, destroy narratives, and dominate rooms without a single word. That weapon is silence. Strategic, calculated, weaponized silence, and the king wields it like a blade, while peasants fill every gap with noise. Watch how most people interact. Someone asks a question, they answer immediately. Someone challenges them, they defend instantly. Someone creates space in a conversation, they rush to fill it. They're terrified of silence. They treat it like a void that must be eliminated, and in that terror, they reveal everything. Their insecurities, their desperation, their lack of control. Because the person who can't tolerate silence is the person who can't tolerate uncertainty, and uncertainty is where power is negotiated. The king has learned to weaponize that gap. When asked a difficult question, he doesn't rush to answer. He holds the silence, lets it build, lets it become uncomfortable, lets the asker start to doubt their question, and when he finally speaks, his words carry weight because they've been waited for. They've created their own gravity. The same words, delivered immediately, would have been just information, but delivered after strategic silence, they become verdict. When accused of something, the peasant defends immediately. The king says nothing. The peasant explains. The king holds eye contact. The peasant tries to repair their relationship. The king lets the accuser sit with their accusation until they start to doubt it themselves. Because silence has this peculiar quality. It makes people fill it with their own fears. They start to imagine what you're thinking, and what they imagine is always more powerful than what you could have said. They project their own doubts, their own inadequacies, their own fears onto your silence, and those projections become their reality. Let me give you a framework. Before you speak, ask yourself, does this strengthen or weaken my position? Does this reveal or conceal my thinking? Does this create mystery or eliminate it? If speaking weakens, reveals, or eliminates mystery, don't speak. Hold a silence. Let them wonder. Let them guess. Let them fill the gap with their imagination. Because mystery creates respect. Uncertainty creates caution, and caution creates space. Space for you to operate without interference. This applies everywhere. In negotiations, the person who speaks first usually loses, because they've revealed their position before understanding the other sides. They've shown their cards. They've eliminated their leverage. The king enters negotiations and says nothing. He lets the other side present. He lets them explain. He lets them reveal their logic, their pressures, their timeline, their constraints. And when he finally speaks, he speaks with complete information. He knows their weaknesses. He knows their desperation. He knows exactly where to apply pressure, and he does so with surgical precision. In conflicts, the person who reacts first has already lost, because they've shown they can be provoked. They've demonstrated that their emotions can be weaponized against them. They've given their opponent the map to their nervous system. The king, when provoked, does nothing. He observes. He studies. He waits. He lets his opponent expend energy on provocations that land nowhere. He lets them escalate against silence. And when they're exhausted, when they've revealed all their tactics, when they've shown all their moves, then, and only then, does he respond. And his response isn't reactive, it's strategic. It's not about the provocation. It's about the objective, and it ends the conflict on his terms. This level of self-control is rare because silence is uncomfortable. Especially for people raised in cultures that worship expression, that treat every thought as worthy of broadcasting, that confuse volume with value. But the king has learned that words are expensive, that every sentence costs credibility, that every explanation creates vulnerability. So he rations his words like a finite resource, and in that rationing, his words gain value. When he speaks, people listen, because they've learned that when he speaks, it matters. The ruthlessness of selective loyalty. Here's something they don't teach in school. Loyalty is conditional. Always. Not because people are evil, but because loyalty is emotional, and emotions are triggered by circumstances. The person who loves you today could betray you tomorrow, not through malice, but through changed incentives, through shifted priorities, through redirected fears. And the king understands this. He doesn't take loyalty personally. He treats it structurally. He asks, not are they loyal, but under what conditions would their loyalty expire? The peasant believes in unconditional loyalty. He thinks that if he's good enough, helpful enough, generous enough, people will stay loyal forever. So he invests in relationships without securing returns. He gives without receiving. He trusts without verifying. And when betrayal comes, and it always comes, he's devastated, not just by the betrayal itself, but by the shattering of his worldview. Because he believed loyalty was earned through goodness. But the king knows loyalty is maintained through leverage. This doesn't mean the king trusts no one. It means he trusts appropriately. He categorizes people by their incentive structure. Some people are loyal to principles. They'll stay with you as long as you embody what they believe. These are valuable but fragile, because if your actions contradict their principles, they'll leave. Some people are loyal to benefit. They'll stay with you as long as the relationship serves them. These are reliable but require maintenance. You must continuously provide value. Some people are loyal to fear. They'll stay with you because leaving would cost them more than staying. These are stable but require vigilance, because if they lose their fear, they lose their loyalty. The king builds teams with this understanding. He doesn't expect universal love. He expects conditional alignment, and he structures those conditions deliberately. He makes himself valuable to the valuable. He makes himself dangerous to the dangerous. He makes himself unavoidable to those whose success depends on him. And in that web of mutual interdependence, he creates stability, not through trust, but through structure. Now, this will sound cold. It is cold. But coldness is clarity without sentiment. And clarity is what allows you to see reality as it is, not as you wish it were. The peasant wishes people were better than they are. The king accepts people as they are and plans accordingly. The peasant is repeatedly disappointed. The king is rarely surprised. The peasant loses sleep over betrayals. The king already had contingencies in place. Let me be explicit about what this means for you. Stop giving unconditional trust. Stop investing in relationships that don't produce returns. Stop maintaining loyalty to people who wouldn't maintain loyalty to you. Every relationship should have clear value exchange. They don't have to be transactional, but they do have to be mutual. And if they're not, if you're the only one giving, the only one compromising, the only one making sacrifices, then you're not in a relationship. You're in a one-sided extraction. And extraction is what happens to resources. Two assets. Two peasants, not two kings. The king evaluates regularly. Who adds value? Who creates friction? Who advances the mission? Who serves only themselves? And based on those evaluations, he redistributes his time, his energy, his trust. He promotes some relationships. He maintains others at distance. He eliminates others entirely. Not with drama, not with explanation. Simply through progressive withdrawal, through increased unavailability, through polite but consistent deflection, until the relationship reaches its natural conclusion, mutual disengagement. This creates space. Space for better relationships. Space for more valuable connections. Space for people whose loyalty is aligned with your objectives, because the king's time is finite. His energy is limited. His attention is the scarcest resource he has, and he refuses to waste it maintaining relationships that don't serve the kingdom. That's not cruelty. That's sovereignty. That's the ruthless efficiency required to build anything that lasts. The transformation from peasant to king, here's the reality. Most people will never make this shift. They'll read this and feel uncomfortable. They'll call it harsh. They'll say, it's missing heart. They'll retreat to their comfortable delusions about fairness and reciprocity and cosmic justice. And they'll stay peasants, governed by others, limited by others, defined by others. And they'll never understand why their goodness didn't translate to greatness, why their authenticity didn't create authority, why their openness didn't generate opportunities. But you, if you've read this far, you're different. Something in you recognized the truth, even if it disturbs you. Something in you has been waiting for permission to stop playing small, to stop being digestible, to stop making yourself accessible to people who wouldn't elevate you if they could. That part of you, that sovereign part, is what we're developing, not creating. Developing. Because it's always been there. It's just been suppressed by 1,000 small compromises you made to fit in, to be liked, to avoid conflict. The transformation begins with recognition. You have to see clearly how you've been thinking like a peasant, where you've been seeking approval, where you've been explaining yourself unnecessarily, where you've been giving away power through transparency, where you've been operating on others' time, where you've been maintaining loyalty to people who wouldn't reciprocate. You have to inventory your peasant behaviors, write them down, study them, understand the mechanisms, because you can't transform what you can't see. Then comes discipline. You start creating gaps between stimulus and response. Someone asks for your time. You don't immediately agree. You pause. You consider. You evaluate whether this serves your objectives. Someone asks for your opinion. You don't immediately share. You redirect. You deflect. You preserve your intellectual property. Someone tries to provoke you. You don't immediately react. You observe. You study. You let the provocation dissolve without giving it the energy it was designed to extract. This will feel uncomfortable. Your entire social conditioning will resist. You'll feel selfish. You'll feel harsh. You'll feel guilty. Good. That discomfort is evidence of transformation. You're breaking neural pathways that have been reinforced for decades. You're violating social contracts you've honored your entire life. You're becoming dangerous to a system that profits from your compliance. The discomfort isn't a sign you're doing it wrong. It's a sign you're doing it right. And gradually, something shifts. You'll notice people start treating you differently. They'll seek your approval more. They'll explain themselves to you more. They'll work harder for your attention because you've become scarce. You've become selective. You've become someone whose validation matters because it's no longer freely given. You've transformed from abundant to scarce, and scarcity creates value. Always. You'll notice you have more energy because you're no longer bleeding it through unnecessary explanations, through emotional reactivity, through maintenance of dead relationships. You're directing that energy toward objectives that compound, toward skills that appreciate, toward positions that strengthen. And that energy, concentrated rather than diffused, creates momentum. And momentum creates results. And results create more opportunities. And opportunities create options. And options create freedom. You'll notice you sleep better because you're no longer tormented by others' opinions. You're no longer lying awake, replaying conversations. You're no longer anxious about perception. You've severed the connection between external validation and internal peace. You've become self-validating, and that self-validation, that internal sovereignty, is the foundation of everything else. But most importantly, you'll notice you start seeing reality more clearly, because you're no longer looking through the lens of how you wish things were. You're seeing how things actually are. You're seeing people's incentives rather than their proclamations. You're seeing systems' functions rather than their stated purposes. You're seeing power's true location rather than its official address. And that sight, that clear, unobstructed sight, is what separates the king from everyone else. Because the king doesn't live in fantasy. He lives in reality, and reality rewards those who see it clearly. The final truth. Let me end where I began. Everything they taught you about fairness, about equality, about humility, about transparency, all of it was designed to keep you manageable. They didn't teach you to think like a king because they need you to think like a peasant. Because peasants are predictable. Peasants are governable. Peasants are productive without being powerful. And the system needs peasants far more than it needs kings. But kings are made, not born. They're made in moments of clarity, in decisions to stop asking permission, in commitments to stop explaining, in disciplines that transform emotional reactions into strategic responses. They're made in silence, in solitude, in the unglamorous work of reconditioning your own thinking. They're made by men who decided that fitting in was less important than standing out, that being liked was less important than being respected, that comfort was less important than sovereignty. The path is clear. The choice is yours. You can continue thinking like you've always thought, seeking approval, explaining yourself, reacting emotionally, maintaining loyalty to people who wouldn't reciprocate, operating on others' terms, and you'll get what you've always gotten. Or you can start thinking differently, holding silence, operating strategically, evaluating ruthlessly, constructing sovereignty, and you'll create what you've never had. Freedom. The king doesn't announce his coronation. He simply starts ruling. And one day, people realize the power dynamic has shifted. That this person is no longer asking, no longer waiting, no longer playing by rules that were designed to limit him. And they adjust. They defer. They respect. Not because they want to, but because the king has created a reality where that's their only option. So stop reading about it. Stop thinking about it. Stop waiting for the right moment. The moment is now. The throne is empty. The crown is unclaimed. The only question is, are you still waiting for permission to take it? Or are you ready to understand that kings don't ask?